on this episode of Thursday Thoughts, it's going to be about safety. So somebody commented, I think it was a post I did about not having a video idea. Somebody commented and suggested safety. So I think that's a great idea, great video for Thursday Thoughts. And especially in this industry, there's a lot of things that, could kill you, just to be honest. I've never seen anybody get killed, but I've seen lots of people, maybe haven't seen lots of people get seriously injured, but there's lots of stories about people getting seriously injured. Especially when I was at the John Deere dealer, we'd have to do safety training every so often, and they would talk about like somebody that got injured. So you just gotta be careful. Like before you get underneath anything, like I've mentioned it before, but like if you're working on a loader and you got to work on a valve bank, cat loaders are the same as John Deere loaders. The valve is underneath the lift. So if you have the arms up, put the lock. There's usually a lock, like a loader lock somewhere. Put that in there. Or if you can't find a loader lock, use a stand or something. Lock it up, because especially if there's a hydraulic leak and you crack the line on the valve, and the lift arms on a loader, a lot of them, I'm not super sure about cat loaders, but John Deere loaders, they just have a T. So the loader up and down is controlled from one fitting. It's just one fitting that tees into two lines for each side. So if you crack that line, both those cylinders are coming down. So you just gotta be careful. Before you crack a hydraulic line, you got to think about what's going to happen. So if you're taking a bucket cylinder off on an excavator and you got a bucket on it, if you crack the line, is the weight of that bucket going to bring that cylinder down? So what I've seen happen a few times, it's happened to me once, is you take, I don't remember exactly what it was, but just use an excavator for example. You're trying to take the bucket cylinder off of an excavator, and you take one of the hoses off, and then you take the second hose off, and the weight of the bucket or the coupler causes the cylinder to collapse, and all the oil will shoot out the port. I've seen that happen a few times, and that can be really, really scary, because it's probably not under as much pressure as the system would be, but it's still a lot of pressure and it's still a lot of velocity, so just got to be careful. That can happen. That's happened to me a couple times where I remember what it was. It was a Cat 308 with the swing bearing got messed up, and I had to pull they call it you pull the house off of the car body. You basically split an excavator, and I was taking the lines off. You got to pull the boom because it's too heavy. At least the shop I was in, it was too heavy to pull off the car body, so we had to pull the boom, and I didn't have it blocked right, and I was taking all the lines off that come down the boom, and that thing's flipped and it sprayed oil everywhere. It didn't get me because it happened after I was done, so I had all the lines off. I didn't have them hard capped yet, and I was doing something else and it sprayed off. And then that's like another thing too, is I always use hard caps, because if that happens, a hard cap will prevent something from spraying or moving. Like instead of just using those little plastic plugs, if you use just a little plastic plug, that thing's going to shoot off of there. But that's another caveat too, because then there's going to be pressure on that hard cap. So before you take any hose off, any line off, any hard cap, make sure you bleed the pressure off. But even if you bleed the pressure off, there still could be pressure behind that cap or hose. So you got to check that. And then the other thing too is pull a pin for a cylinder or whatever. If it's going out real hard, then there's probably pressure on it. So I always try to go, and if it's moving easy, there's not going to be a lot of pressure on it. Make sure you're supporting whatever you're trying to move. You got to check that stuff. And also, never stick your finger in a hole. If you're trying to line up a pin, use a line-up bar, use a screwdriver, use a hammer. I've used a hammer before, a pick. You never put your finger in there, because something could fall. It could fall, it could move, lots of things could happen, and you could lose your finger. We had a guy when I worked at the cat dealer in California. He was a supervisor, but he was missing the tip of, I don't remember which finger it was, but one of his fingers he was missing the tip because that he was trying to line something up and it moved on him and it clipped his finger right off. Another big one, at least for me, that I'm always really concerned about is a grease gun. Like, I got a lock and lube fitting for mine because I didn't want to have my hand in there. So there was a guy when I worked at the cat dealer in California. He was a lube guy. They had two, but he was one of them at the time. And he was holding the grease fitting on, I don't remember what he was doing, but he was holding the grease fitting on something and he had his hand right there and he was pumping it. Well, that hose ruptured right where his hand was because it was kinked and it pumped his hand full of grease. So they had as far as I remember, I don't think he ever went back to work. They had to cut his hand open and scoop all the grease out. And, by the time he realized what was going on and let go of the trigger, it had already pumped quite a bit of grease in his hand. So that was, I don't think he ever went back to work after that. You also got to think about like crushing injuries and stuff, like something falling, like, don't ever work underneath like a bucket or anything, a bucket tooth falling, or just, that's kind of common sense. You got to make sure you don't ever want to like be underneath anything. One thing that I've always done too is I've always checked jack stands. So if you're working on a machine or a truck, I mean, machines are a little different, but say you're working on a truck and you're doing, a differential, and then somebody was working on it and then they give you the job. I always check the stands because you never know how somebody else could have done something. When I was working at the John Deere dealer, we had a guy he'd been there for years and he kind of got complacent. And I don't know, I think he's probably retired now, but he just was getting lazy. And he was working on it was like a 324, I think, and it needed to be line board, the articulation cylinder. So he had it split and everything, and then he was gone on vacation or whatever, and they wanted me to work on it. So it had already been done line board, so I go back to start working on it. There's all these hydraulic lines stuff you got to run. And so I inspected the jack stands, and he barely had the back of it, because the back of it's heavy, so it sits like this. So it was barely on the jack stand. I'm talking like 1/8 of an inch sitting on this jack stand, and nobody bothered to look at it. And I'm like, I'm not going to work underneath that thing until I inspect it. So I always do that. It's something I always check is if you're not the one that blocked it up or jack stand it up or whatever, check. Make sure that you check because you never know. You don't want to put your life in somebody else's hands. That's what I always say. And then, like burns and cuts and stuff, it kind of comes along with the job. So, yeah, there's ways to avoid it, but, it's just going to happen. But hydraulic lines and pins and stuff like that, you just really got to pay attention. Just really be careful because it can happen. Gloves and safety glasses and stuff. I always wear safety glasses in the shop just because that's just what I do. I mean, some people don't like safety glasses, but I don't want to get something in my eye or anything like that. Everybody's goal is the same. Like, you got to be here, make money, but then you still need to go home. You still got to make sure you can make it home. So just be careful, be aware. And if anybody saw that short I did about that cylinder on the backhoe, and I said it came out when I pulled the pin, there was no pressure on the pin. I hammered the pin out, and that thing like barely creeped out of there. Like there was no pressure on it. I think it was just air pressure that pushed it out. So it wasn't, there was a bunch of comments on that video about that thing like checked the pin and all that, but there was just air pressure is what came out. So hope you guys liked this episode of Thursday Thoughts. Like, comment, subscribe. If anybody likes to donate to the channel, the PayPal link's down below. Just I'm gonna keep all the money in the channel. I bought a new computer and some new camera gear and stuff. So thanks for watching.